This meeting is for 1 hour and 15 minutes. Evan, you will be sharing on the 12 steps to solve all your problems for 50 minutes. Evan, thank you for your service and your willingness to share your life with us today. The Broken Elevator loves primetime speakers, and we are delighted to have you with us at God's meeting. At this time, please help me give a warm welcome to Evan from Palm Desert, California. His home group is Sunday Primetime Boston. Welcome, Evan, and over to you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Evan, and I have alcoholism. So glad to be here. It was a lovely day. I didn't get nervous at all today until I was actually in the meeting. Then I started to get nervous. I'm like, oh no, there's newcomers here. I'm going to say the wrong thing. And I don't often have notes or take notes, but I took notes this week. There's so much that I want to share with you, and who knows what'll actually come out. That's sort of none of my business, really. But I'll just say, there's a lot for me that I've discovered in this process of living the steps that I just want to share, that I feel like is important. And what my best expectation is that you'll hear one thing and that you'll go, oh, I never thought about it that way. And maybe that'll become part of the next step of your expanding journey. And it's kind of all I hope for, but I have a lot to sort of say and share. My home group is a primetime meeting, and it sounds like some of you are familiar with it. I don't know how much time I'll spend with that exactly. Just to say that, gosh, how long ago? I guess it was about 10 years ago that I found primetime, and it's just it's a format like other meetings that talks about that has its own particular focus or bent on the 12 steps, but it's just the straight 12-step message. But it tends to focus on the part where it says the disease centers in our mind, and that bottles are just a symbol, and a symptom really of a deeper sort of ism. And I found for myself that to be true. And initially, let's see, I'm going to try to take it slow and just talk about what I want to talk about and not feel like I've got to share the perfect thing. I guess here's what I want to say. So about 3 years ago, so I've been in the program now 25-ish years. So about 3 years ago, right around when the pandemic was hitting, it was perfect timing for me because I was hitting a bottom. Yeah, I hit another bottom in my life. And, I kind of hit another bottom roughly every 7 years. And, I think that's what they say, that all the cells in your body have completely changed. It's like I'm made anew every 7 years, God says, your understanding of the universe, that's great. It's worked for you up to here. Your new realizations and your revelations are all great. Your understanding of God is great. Now let's tear it all down. And let's go to the next level and really understand this at a deeper level. That's my sort of experience of these steps. And that's very much what happened this last time. So 3 years ago, I was in this group, participating in this group, and it was all about making the world a better place and being the best versions of ourselves and creating a new world. And there was so much in it that jived with the 12 steps that was about sort of smashing the ego and ego death and all that. And it just rattled me to my core for some reason, because I was trying so hard to sort of be the perfect person. And, in that whole thing, the wheels came off. And essentially what happened was I sort of saw the man behind the curtain, and it was me. So what I was trying to do, I didn't realize it, is I was trying to be great, and I was trying to have this great life. And I was using the 12 steps to do it. I've been in 4 or 5 12-step programs and worked the steps many times. And I'm a huge lover of the 12 steps because there's nobody at the top of the organization. So there's no like big ego that can just tear the whole thing down, which I see with almost every other organization. Somehow egos get involved. And this is one of the few places where that doesn't happen, thank God. And the other part of it is it guarantees a spiritual awakening, which I really like that guarantee. And I have worked the steps many times in my life around money, around relationships, and I have never been disappointed. My financial situation has been revolutionized. My relationships have been revolutionized by these steps. So I consider it pretty much the best thing on planet Earth. And so here I am using the steps to become a better and better version of myself. Isn't that the goal? We become these great people. And, it took the moment where everything started to fall apart was, I think I'd sold a script or something. And I was so happy about that. And I had this moment where I said, wait a minute, I'm doing well enough in my life. I have enough love in my life. I have enough success in my life. If I add to that with this, if I get successful at the next level, is that really going to complete me? And I realized, absolutely not. I realized it might get 7% better, but that is not what my ego was chasing. And everything collapsed. And because I realized that happiness that I was chasing was never going to come. And that was the beginning of that bottom. And I realized what I had been addicted to. So I'm a big believer in all the 12-step programs, applying it to your life. And then there are all these things where they don't have 12-step programs for. And a lot of these things are character defects, which I now call character defenses. And I look at a lot of these character defenses, the deepest ones, as their own addiction in and of itself. I very much regard the character defenses and character defects as their own little mini drug addictions. And perhaps I'll get into that because, we're dealing with once we get past the outer pharmacy, we start to get into the inner pharmacy. And one of the things that was coming to the fore in this one was my whole life was built around the drug of trying to feel better than other people, to make myself better than everybody else. That was the life that I was living. And so when that started to fall apart, all of a sudden, all those readings in the 12-step that I tried to identify with, like 6063, where it talks about, weren't we just the actors trying to arrange? I was kind of read that and went, yeah, but not really. Really, I'm kind of a good guy. You know what I mean? I'm just doing the best I can. It didn't apply to me. But then I started to see it. I started to see, wasn't everything I was doing, even inside of 12 steps, just trying to make my life better and make me great and make me better than everybody else and win at the game of life? That's all I was doing all day long. And I had God as my co-pilot. I mean, at this time, I was working the steps, living the steps. My whole life was the steps and God. And God was my co-pilot, which meant I was flying the plane and I was checking in with God just to see, like, hey, are we on track here? We doing good? I think so. Let's keep going. What do you think? Never mind. Let's go. Because I couldn't see it, but I was in the thralls of a very serious drug addiction. And that drug addiction was called ambition. I was going to make it, and that was going to make me whole. And that was in front of God. I was using God to try to help me replace God, And so, and even more importantly, I saw self, and we talk a lot about that in prime time, right? We talk a lot about the mind as being the playground where the disease really gets us. And we talk about self. And for the first time, I could see that there was something other than me running my life. And this was hell. I mean, this bottom that I hit was 4 months where I could barely get out of bed. I was so devastated because there was nothing to live for, because there was nothing to strive for. My whole life had been striving. That was the drug that I was on, and I was now coming off of it. And what was there to live for? And I realized I didn't know. And I saw one thing very clearly. It's like when an alcoholic is drinking, they have no concept of what sobriety is or feels like. They can't know. But once they experience it, once they taste it, it's like so much better than the drinking ever was. But they don't get to know in advance what they're giving up. And the alcohol seems like the best thing in the world until it doesn't, until you realize. And so all these things that I thought were the best thing about me, I thought that ambition was the best thing about me. For so long, I thought it was my identity. It was who I was. And now I realized it's the worst. It's this. So there's this self, which is this greedy, graspy thing. And so I started to decide, not to get to Eastern philosophy on you all, but here I go. I started to disidentify from this self. I started to see that this thing was not me, that I was being taken over by this parasitic organism that had to have. Now, here was another beautiful thing that happened in this bottom. I'd been in this group, and there was a lot of great stuff in it. And one of the things that happened was I started to really go deep with several people. And there were about 5 to 7 people where I really got all the way down to kind of like the core of their being. Like I could, to the point where I could see their soul. And they were all so different, but so incredibly beautiful. It's like I could see who they presented themselves to be at the level of mind. And then I got to see them at the heart level, which was great. But then when I got down to the soul level, I got to see how incredibly perfect each one of us is. And these people were all so different, but so perfect in their own way. You couldn't compare them. You know, like it's comparing rubies to emeralds. It's like they're both amazing. Like, because this one person had this fiery, peppery, beautiful spirit and soul. And this other person had this light angelic thing. And it's like, was one better than the other? No, I realized they were all amazing. And then what started to happen to me in this bottom is I started to see my own truth, my own true being, because I was starting to separate from this false identity that had me. And that false identity that had me, I started to see was born of an incredible lie. And that lie was that I was not worth anything. So somewhere in my childhood, back 3, 4, 5, this idea came, I'm not worth anything. And for a child, that just like we talk about in prime time all the time, I have a mind that speaks to me with great authority. When you're a child and your mind tells you something, you don't go, oh, that's just my mind. It occurs as truth. So this great truth that I was worth nothing lived from age 3 as a deep prevailing truth until age 55, 52 years. It ran my life until I saw it. And once I start to see something, that's when I can start to be free of it. Bill says in the big book, he says, I saw I could not so much as take a single drink. Up until then, he didn't realize what his problem was. He thought it was a problem of managing alcohol. He was drinking it at the wrong times. He should drink whiskey after 3. That was the ticket. But then he saw on a deeper level. And then it took him 2 years after that for him to realize that he was totally powerless and that he couldn't stop. So this process of becoming aware, I've been saying to sponsees a lot lately, 90% of this work is realizing what the work really is. To see what it is I'm actually powerless over. I could not see this ambition because I thought it was me. And once I saw it, the whole thing unraveled. And so I really began working these steps in earnest. And I had a sponsor, and it was so great the way that he took me through the steps. He took me through the 12 and 12. And he said, I want you to look at this as an instruction book, and I want you to write down every instruction. And you know, I mean, I've been in program for a long time, and I've sat in 12 and 12 meetings, and we've read that, and people comment on it and all this stuff. But it's like, I never got it. If you read the 12 and 12, Bill says one thing 40 times in the 12 and 12. It couldn't be any clearer. And I missed it, and I missed it, and I missed it, and it couldn't be any clearer. It says, you must hit bottom. You must admit total powerlessness, utter defeat. There's not a lot of ways to interpret that language. And yet what I find in program, myself firstly, and then I see with everybody else, is all of that gets whitewashed. And we start to talk about surrender. Like it's this kind of nice thing, surrender. Oh, well, I know I need to surrender that. That's not the language of the 12 and 12. The word surrender doesn't appear in the first step in the 12 and 12, because this other language is preferred. So I've stopped using the term surrender. As a matter of fact, the word surrender doesn't appear in the 12 and 12 at all, which is like, wow. So there's this cultural AA that has developed where we all hear things, but this going directly to the text and finding out for myself what it means to me is such a powerful thing. You know, it reminds me of people in church listening to somebody else tell them what it means versus going to the text and going, God, what does this really mean? I want to know. And so, you know, I started to see that and so the title of my talk, it's like, can solve all your problems. It's like, we practice these principles in all our affairs. What does that mean? It means that in every single aspect of my life, I take these principles and I apply them. Now, that the principle of the first step is I must hit bottom. That is not the way that's not the way Western culture thinks. So I have a problem with my boss. So in order to deal with that problem, I must hit bottom is not how we do that. Normally, we try to come up with theories and strategies and solutions. And I realized with this disease of self, that was the main thing I had to abstain from. The big preoccupation with self is fixing myself, trying to make myself this better, complete person. And I realized, you know, the thing that Einstein says, you cannot solve the problem from the level of the problem. Now, I was doing a little bit better than that. I was trying to solve the problem from the level of the problem with God's help. So God, you know, got some stuff in there. So my life improved. But when I saw that all self wants to do is try to go out and fix everything, that completely changed my life. Because I realized that I cannot fix myself. There's not one thing that I can do to fix myself, but I can change as long as I'm not the one doing it. And I hope I'll get into some of the specifics of how that worked for me, because I have all these notes and I haven't looked at them once, so I have no idea where I am in my talk at all. But it's going good so far. So far, I'm really enjoying it. So what I saw was, so my first chapter in Primetime was amazing. I got there and I'd already done the Eckhart Tolle thing for 5 years. I was already watching my thoughts and I already saw that my thoughts were the things that were creating a nightmare for me. The problem was 5 years into Eckhart Tolle, I was seeing them. And so I had more separation from them, but I was still believing my thoughts. And my thoughts were of the worst kind. I don't know about your thoughts, but my thoughts are, I am evil. I am terrible. I am the worst person on the planet. I deserve to die. These are what my thoughts are like. I'm a low bottom thinker, right? And so, you know, I start to see that, and, you know, and just full disclosure, as I was starting Primetime, I started doing Byron Katie work, which I highly recommend, because the main function of it, there's nothing to believe about her work. That's one of the things that I like. And basically, she just asked 5 questions. And I found, you know, these questions so incredibly powerful in the light of Primetime, and really worked well with it, which is this true? So I really started questioning the thoughts at the gate. I really started tending my garden and watching these thoughts come in. And I'll tell you, I started doing this all the time. I mean, just nonstop every day, because it's like the thought would come in, my boss hates me. Now, if I believe that thought, then I have to live in that reality. My thought hates me. But if I start to question that thought and I start to do this meditation on it, I start to bring reality into it, I'll have to start to admit the truth, which is I don't really know what he's thinking. I don't really know that that's true. And I can stop acting as if it's true, right? I can stop believing it. So one of the fundamental aspects of this, and even though, you know, my journey has deepened a lot since that, I think one of the most important things that I realized at that point, which is a building block for me, which is I feel like it's important to share, I realized I am not the thinker in my mind. That's such an important thing. I am not choosing the thoughts that pop into my head. Now, once I get that, that's really wild. Because so often I identify with my thoughts. I think I'm thinking that thought. If I'm thinking that thought, it's a completely different reality than the thoughts are coming. So the way that I look at my thoughts today is every thought is an invitation from a certain energy or from a certain place that says, do you want to go down this road? Now think of the most dramatic person you know. They will extend you invitations to jump into their drama ad nauseum. You know what I mean? You can see them wanting to pull you in. And that's how my thoughts are. My thoughts want to pull me into this. And I got such a great example of this. I was working with a newcomer recently, and this guy was bonkers crazy. You know what I mean? Like, he believed everything in his head. And it was like, I was a little scared to interact with him. I thought, this is just going to pull me right out. I'm going to get pulled into his drama. And you know what happened? The opposite happened. I could see that everything that he was believing was so not true. And it was so painful to him. And here's the irony. You know, he's like invested in this religion and all these different beliefs. And he really reminded me of me. I remember, you know, when I was 30, you know, so 26 years ago, I remember I was always writing a self-help book in my head. And I was miserable. Like, I was so miserable. And yet in my mind, I'm teaching the world how to be happy. And I could see the same thing with this guy. He has all these rules about happiness and ideas about happiness, but none of them are making him happy. Because happiness occurs when we're in contact with reality. And this is the corollary to the thought thing. I don't believe there's such a thing as a true thought. I think there are thoughts that are truer than others, but every thought is like a photograph. It's a 2D picture of something that's real. And for me, and this is a big part of this bottom that I've been describing, because here I had, you know, 22, 23 years of all this 12-step wisdom and thinking I'm this 12-step guy, this 12-step guru. I have all this spiritual knowledge. I had to throw it all away in order to actually be happy. Those thoughts, my ideas about God, couldn't make me happy. I needed the actual experience of God. I needed to live in that place. And every thought that I had about that process and about God was something that was in the way of that. So thus began this process for me of bringing everything to the steps. So if I'm going to work and I'm feeling afraid, how do you work the steps on that? What's the process by which I do that? First, I have to see my sickness. I have to see, I could not so much as take a single drink. For me, the word seeing is almost synonymous with admitting. If I see it, I can heal it. Now, one of the biggest issues I see, you know, dealing with sponsees is the absolute addiction to the current circumstance and the belief that the problem is starting there. This is the great illusion for me. So I'll just give you a brief example. I had a sponsee recently, and he had termites in his house, and he just moved into this house, and he makes a lot of money, and the landlord was not going to help him with it, and he was upset, right? The landlord saying it's his responsibility. Now, this seems like a problem, and yet it's not a problem. He has enough money where it's going to cost him, what, $3,000. I mean, this guy, he could probably go out and spend $3,000 on sweaters in an afternoon. So that's not really an issue for him. It's not really, and yet he's mad. But why is he mad? So one of the great enduring truths I'm really seeing is one of the things it says in Course in Miracles: we're never upset for the reason we think we're upset. And I'll take that a step further, and I'll tell you, I think why. Because when we're upset, it's always the past that is upsetting us. The current thing that is happening is only a trigger. And this is why the steps are so critical. Because when you're dealing with a trigger, you're dealing with something that's decades old. And I always tell my sponsees, if you've been dealing with a problem for decades, you're probably powerless over it. And so these things, you know, we're powerless over these outside circumstances. And that's the easier part to think. Oh, I'm powerless over my coworkers. I'm powerless over my boss. Yeah. But what I'm really powerless over is my emotional reaction to these people and to these things and these circumstances. That's what I'm really powerless over. And that's what I really need to bring the steps to. So here he is, he's upset. But why is he upset? He's upset because he feels like he's being treated unfairly, or he feels like he's being taken advantage of. That's why he's really upset. And that's reminding him of some childhood thing where that happened. And so now he's in this trauma response. And that's what this whole addiction of self is. We have all these different parts of us that get activated as a result of trauma, and they take us over. And what we do is we try to fix those feelings of trauma by solving the problem today. And that is insanity. Because it does not matter if he takes this guy to small claims court or the guy pays for it. None of that affects this. None of that affects this charge that he has in his stomach because he feels like he's being taken advantage of. That is something that he's powerless over because he's not choosing that. The thoughts of being taken advantage of, he's not thinking, oh, I'm going to think that I'm being taken advantage of and therefore be. He's not choosing that. It is taking him over. He's absolutely powerless over this. And when you're powerless, I recommend using the steps. And the first part of that, and this sounds like strange advice, what I beg all my sponsees, all the people that I deal with to do is forget about the situation completely, ignore it, and go to the reaction. And take that reaction and bring God into it and see that you actually can't do anything to change your reaction and that you have been doing every possible thing in your life that you can to try and fix that reaction, and you have been unsuccessful. So stop trying to fix it. And I've reduced the 12 steps down to one idea because this is the kind of thing that makes me happy and interested. You're right. If you had to boil the 12 steps down to one notion, it would be this for me. The second I take my hooks out of something, genuinely take my hooks out of it, God will heal it. And the corollary to that is if I'm still working on it, God can't get in there and do anything with it. Because if I do step one well, the rest of the steps pretty much take care of themselves. Let's be honest. If I really give up and I really surrender. So surrender, if you're talking about surrender like the way we use it in program, I'm not that excited. I'm not impressed. Somebody said surrender this way. When you're in battle and you wave a white flag, you're in a war and you wave a white flag. When you're waving that white flag, you have no idea what is going to happen to you. You could be rescued, you could be killed, but you don't care. I just give up. That's surrender. And it's also, I don't know whether you've noticed this in my studies of this, it's not something I can do consciously. I can do this work and I can prepare the ground for surrender, but it's not me that has to do the surrendering. It's that ego part that is holding on. So what I say a lot is, and the reason the title of this is the 12 step can solve all my problems. First of all, I don't think any of us really have any problems, but that's a separate issue. Maybe that's another talk. But if there's an area of my life that doesn't have flow in it, where I can tell that God is not flowing through me and it's not working, then this is the reason why there needs to be a bottom, because in that part of my life, not my whole life, right? Because we have separate parts to us. In that part of my life, the ego is still in charge. That wounded child and that message that the child got is still running the show. And until that thing, and you can represent that by this, there's some part of me that's clenched like this. And until that lets go, God can't work through that. God can't do anything. And the most powerful thing I can do is see that this is happening. Because when I see it, I can start to deal with that. So let me talk about this more specifically. So what does it look like? Okay, so let me give you an example of recently, so I've been doing this for 3 years now, and I've probably gone through 6 or 7 bottoms because I'm taking this literally. If I have a place where there's no flow, that means there's a bottom to be had, because that means the ego's still in charge. That means I have to be willing. One of my favorite lines in the first chapter, the 12 and 12, step 1 is, we soon take quite another view of this absolute humiliation. I start to realize, and I think it's something like we perceive that only through hitting bottom can we find the first steps to freedom. I'm starting to really see the truth of that. If the ego's in charge, only that sort of ego death is going to allow things to flow. So what does that look like? So as you know, I had my bottom around ambition, and I had a year where I didn't really do any work. And through no fault of my own, a successful business built up around me. And I literally made 3 phone calls, and it happened. Now, I can tell you that happened almost for sure because of that deep surrender that I had, where I didn't care anymore. The point of this story is not if you surrender, then you will get all the goodies that you want. The point of the story is you have to really look at that part that wants the goodies, because we have everything we need right now. And the part that wants the goodies is the lie that says, I need more than I have, because I don't. I have everything I need, which is peace in my heart and God. That's all I need. Everything else is the ego grasping and wanting for more because it feels like less. Okay, so I had this business, and I had this situation where I was really busy, and I was doing a lot of work, and I was doing this contracts with this guy, and I felt like maybe he wasn't paying me what I was worth. And so I was in all this thing. And so it's like, okay, here's an example of I'm agitated. If I'm agitated, that means I'm not surrendered. If I'm surrendered, I don't care. It's fine. Is it blue or is it green? Sure. That's surrendered. If it has to be green, and this is not the right color of green, I'm suing you, that's the opposite of surrender, right? So I saw that I was twisted up somehow. And I started to see, that I was doing some eating around this. And I started to see what was really going on. I was afraid. I was people pleasing. I was afraid they would be unhappy with me or think that I wasn't great. So I started to really look at that. Now, I could have, and what I would normally do in Western society, I would try to sit down with this guy, this client / creative director guy, and have a talk with him and try to reason that out. But I knew that was a dodge. That's the ego trying to solve the problem because it believes the problem is real. I know there's no problem. That's the thing. If I work the steps enough, I realize I don't have problems. I have misperceptions. I have places where I'm seeing a problem and there's not a problem, right? So I know I'm seeing a problem that's not real. And so I start to bring consciousness. I start to look at it. I start to see how terrified and wounded this part of me is and how afraid it is of being thrown away. And then I got down to the piece that was really the key. I realized that for the last, however, 15 or 20 years, every creative project that I've received, my initial reaction is, I can't do it. That part of me is so terrified that it can't do it, but it has to do it because otherwise it'll be thrown away, but it can't do it, but it has to, but it can't. So see, now I'm down to, this is my issue. My issue is not how my boss is treating me. My issue is I have a piece that believes it is not enough and that it can't do it and it can never get it right. It's never going to be good enough. That's my disease. That's where my disease lives. And I need to bring the steps to that. So I started to work with that. And I started to see the pain that thing was in. So that's step one for me, is I have to get rid of the outside situation. And I have to start looking at the inner reaction and seeing that it's coming from a part of me that is wounded. Now, the most important thing to do about that is nothing, because there's a temptation right there to go, okay, how do I fix it? And that's what I call the disease question. I have so many sponsees, we work backward to get them all the way down to their fears, and they see some horrible, ugly, beautiful truth, and they go, oh my God, I've been doing this. Oh my God, my whole life. And then the question inevitably comes, how do I fix it? That's the moment where I stop and I do nothing. And this is my understanding of step two. So the words in step two, again, I love the big book, but when it comes to the steps, I favor the 12 and 12. You can all do it however you want. I'm just telling you what my process is, right? Because the 12 and 12, so in the big book, there's this incredible idea which says you can create your own conception of God, right? And that is one of the most important ideas to ever happen and it made AA the success it was. It brought people in. The word belief does not exist in the 12 and 12. At least in the second step. I think it doesn't exist in the whole thing. I could be wrong about that. So in the second step, in working it in the 12 and 12, these are the words that it uses. It says, relax, take it easy, don't struggle, allow God to come to you piece by piece. And so here's what I've seen with myself and how I now work the steps. And this is what I do moment to moment to moment on a daily basis, is I go, okay, I'm powerless over this. So I'm now no longer running from it. So I'm not trying to get rid of it, nor am I trying to fix it. So it's just there. And my word, my verb for the first 3 steps is allow. I allow that pain and suffering of that part to just be there, to just be what it is. And it goes right along with the notion of I cease fighting anything or anyone. And that's how I take my hooks out of it. So what I do is I sit with that feeling. I sit with that part in the way that a loving parent would sit with a wounded child. I'm with it. The best words I can use to describe with it is being with it. And somehow this has become my second step practice. I allow that feeling to be, and I see that suffering. And then the most amazing things start to happen. Sanity starts to return in the second step. New ideas start to come in. When I continue to not put my hooks into it, all of a sudden, all new conceptions, I start to have the spiritual awakening in step 2 that it talks about. And the new ideas that come in are completely different from all the ideas I've had before. And my entire notion of how to handle this problem or deal with this problem is completely reoriented in the same way that Bill's was around alcohol. And the reason I'm talking about all this way is because in the beginning, for me, this was theoretical. Like, it said it in the book, I'm trying this, but now I'm doing this again and again and again with the same results. The spiritual awakening is guaranteed. And so then for me, my step 3 is there's all these new ideas coming in. These are God's ideas. And I start taking action on these. And so that's why I say it's so important not to take any action until I start to become restored to sanity. Once I start getting to sanity, I will intuitively know how to handle these situations. And I'm talking about the immediacy of these problems. I'm talking about the termite problem. I'm talking about how do I deal with my day-to-day moment realities? If you're like me and you were doing the way that I work my steps is my sponsor gives me the assignment and I wake up every day and I read 60 and 63, or I read 86 and 87, and then I pray at night and I do a 10 step. It's like, that's great. That's really great. That's a much better way of living and brings incredible results. And what I'm talking about here is the next level of that. And what does it say at the beginning? I think I wrote it down here. Where is it? AA's 12 steps are a group of, I saw it in the literature, a group of principles, spiritual in their nature, which practiced as a way of life can expel the obsession to drink and enable the sufferer to become happily and usefully whole. And I liken that to, I'm learning pickleball. I've been a lifetime tennis player. I'm learning pickleball, right? And so there's a big difference. It's like, so I'll go out and I play pickleball 2-3 times a week. Now, that's a bunch. I'm learning, I'm getting better. It's very different than someone who's trying to play pickleball professionally. They're doing pickleball as a way of life. And so this is what I'm talking about, this moment to moment. And instead of thinking about it as the steps, is getting the principles. So first I must hit bottom. So when my sponsor had me go through this, it's like, that is practical and applicable. I can do that. Like, hit bottom. It's like, okay, here's my problem. How do I hit bottom with this? How do I admit complete defeat? Like, there's an action in those steps that I can take. And I can continue to work with that until that surrender happens. All right, I'm going to look at I didn't look at my notes this whole time, which is both terrible and impressive at the same time. But I want to there were a couple things that I wanted to say. So let me just quickly talk, because I've been in OA for 25 years. I don't know if there's any out there who deal with food. I'm sure not. I'm sure it's just me. And, I've seen some things recently, and I've seen, my lack of surrender, and I've had long periods of abstinence in OA, and it's been great. But just recently, I've really applied these steps. And so I have a belief, look, you may read through these steps and you may go through them and start applying them to your life and come up with entirely different answers than I do. And to that, I say, awesome. It's about you having your spiritual awakening, not you having my spiritual awakening. So you don't have to come to any of these answers. But when we work these steps earnestly and honestly, I think the fundamental change happens. And it may sound totally different than but you're that beautiful, perfect soul and spirit, and your beautiful soul is going to get expressed in the way that it does. And I say, more effing power to you. I want to see how your soul sings and dances, But so I'm applying it to food, and I realize now, like I said, 90% of it is getting down to what the actual real thing is. And I see that despite what I thought in OA, I'm actually seeing for me today, my real powerlessness, the thing I've really been holding on to, is me trying to control my food in any way. That's what I've been trying to do my whole life. And I mention this because for me, there's a lesson in here. And why am I trying to control my food? Why? Well, because I want to look good for all of you. I want to control the shape of my body so that I look good. And the fear of letting go, of really surrendering, is if I really let go and I stop trying to control, I'm going to be 500 pounds or more. That's the fear that keeps me in check, that keeps me trying to control. And I realize what I'm doing is I'm chasing this idea of this perfect body or this perfectly fit thing to the gates of insanity and death. And I think if you look at each one of these places where we're suffering in our lives, you'll see that same kind of idea that we're trying to get to. I know for me, the place where I probably have the most recovery, the most freedom is money. I see, I'm not jealous of the billionaire, because I know more than likely the reason the billionaire has billions is because he feels so damn worthless. And I know that $2 billion didn't fix it. And you know how I know is because money does not fix that core wound. It just does not in any way, shape, or form. So you can have as much money as you want, but unless you're spending it on the therapy and doing the work, it doesn't fix anything. And in a lot of cases, I'm sure it does what it has done for me, which is makes me feel better than other people. And that's what I'm really looking for, right? I want to feel better. And that's my disease. And so now seeing that I have this obsession to try to be okay, it's all sort of falling apart. So again, these principles, what am I chasing? What am I grasping for? If I can look at that energy that's trying to hold on, that's trying to make my life great. Now, and this is another big picture concept. Why am I trying to make my life great? Think about that. Why am I trying to do it? Well, the reason is because I don't think God's going to do it for me. Now, you may, like myself, have 20 plus years, but there may be for like there was for me, even though this part over here, I had all the health and recovery, right? Because somebody can do their steps in, let's say, DA and heal their money, doesn't do a damn thing for their sex and love addiction, right? They're the same person. They've just developed all this faith in God. Why is that faith in God not translating to this? Because what I've seen is this self, this thing we call self, this ego complex, is not made up of one. I call it 13 to 30, but it could be 30 to 100. We have all these different parts. And for me, each one of these parts is like a different sponsee. It's on its journey. Some of these parts that I have, these ego parts, have hit bottom and have opened up and are experiencing all the peace that comes with it on the other side. My relationship to money is one of, I have enough abundance, but I'm not like the richest person in the world. But the freedom I have in that area is incredible. And it has nothing to do with money. Because what is money? Why do people grasping at money? Because they're afraid that they'll be crushed if they don't have it. They'll be, and this is what I'm pointing to. Each one of these pieces and parts is terrified that unless it holds it all together, there's not a loving universe out there to protect them. In fact, the universe is actually out to get them. And so I need to bring this love and compassion and these steps to each one of these parts. And God shows me which part is next. So I have 2 parts that I'm working on right now. Right now, this revolution, and I'm hopefully all of you have experienced that incredible revolution that happens when everything starts to change as a result of that surrender and that letting go. I'm experiencing that with food. I mean, I've had abstinence and I've had, revolutions and stuff, but this is a deeper one. And it's just incredible to be in that state where everything is changing and all my ideas are getting thrown away. And I'm at the start of a journey. So I'm a director and I've had some success, which has been great. And I also realized too, I have this incredible block when it comes to my own material. I'm completely blocked. And all the other success that I've had, now I don't have any excuse if I don't have enough time or I don't have enough money or I don't have enough equipment. I've had all these excuses before and the disease has gotten to hide. Now I realize that part of me is just frozen with terror. So terrified to be judged. So over here, I have a part that is at step 0. It is out there drinking. And I have these other parts that have all this freedom and all this peace. How can that be? Aren't I one person? I am. I'm that beautiful soul and spirit that connected with those other beautiful soul and spirits. And the more that I do this work and I see these parts that are in pain and tortured and expressing themselves, sure, I can go out and I can join a group and I can try to work on it and I can write screenplay pages every day, or I can, try to join the exercise group. A lot of that is fixing and a lot of that is bandages. Not all of it, but a lot of it is, because the ego always wants to try to fix it and solve it. If I deduce that I've tried 10 different groups and it's not moving, I really recommend the steps in that to see that, like, oh shit, there's a part here, a wounded part that is never going to let go until it is seen, paid attention to, and it gets to see the love of God and it gets reclaimed. And then all this beauty, all the God trapped under that wounded part can be released and unleashed on the world and express itself. Most beautiful thing in the world. Most beautiful thing in the world. And it can happen for each and every one of us in each and every compartment of our lives. If we continue to take this notion seriously of, I bring these principles to my everyday problems, instead of trying to get up on it and work on it, I do the opposite of what we do in our society. I give up. I just lay down on the ground and say, I can't do it anymore. And watch what happens. You think it's going to destroy you. You think it's going to be the end of everything. And what it turns out to be is the beginning of an incredible new power. All right, I've got 2 minutes. Let's see if there's any other juicy tidbits here I can leave you with. I guess the one thing I would say, I didn't look at my notes, but I really hit a lot of these things. This is great. I guess I would say is, wherever you're at in the journey, is I don't think there's an end to this journey. I don't think there's an end to the amount of peace you can experience in this lifetime. I think all of that peace is trapped under these parts, and it's very scary. And it says in the big book, it says, each of these 12 steps asks us to go against our own personal instincts. And that's really what this is, to go into the pain. I had a sponsee say to me this week, he goes, this is not intuitive at all, going into this pain, except when you do it, you notice that you get so centered and everything gets so simple and so quiet. So it seemed, because the ego is putting up all these roadblocks saying, don't go this way, the wrong way, you'll die, you'll suffer if you go this way. But that's actually the path to freedom, is to go into these things. The only way out is through. And instead of trying to fix our problems, to hit bottom with them, and really surrender. So, I don't think this has ever happened before in the history of my speaking, but I think I'm going to stop there and end a touch early, give somebody else a chance to speak, because I pretty much said what I wanted to say, amazingly. So it's really been great to be here with you all today and just to share my thoughts, and feel free to borrow and use any ones that you like. I want to say I love you all, but I feel scared to say that, but I'm just going to go ahead and say it anyway. Thank you for letting me share.